dealing with the issue of the of why is it according to the Mishnah you would take the lulav both in the Beis Hamikdash and out of the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos when when Yontif was when first day Yontif fell on Shabbos. So the question is, why wouldn't you take it? I mean, for us, we don't take it even the first day Yontif falls out on Shabbos. But the first thing the Gemara has to figure out is why don't you take it when Shabbos falls out on Chol HaMoed? So, let's pick up actually let's read that again because it's so important, from the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom on Mem Bet Amud. So the Gemara says, Amai, why should it be a problem even during the week when Shabbos falls out on Chol HaMoed? Take lulav then. Tiltu ba'almahu, it's just muktzah. The lidchi Shabbos, let Shabbos override muktzah concerns. So Amar Rabba, gzeira shemi yitlenu b'yadav yelei chetzel baki liomod. We're afraid you'll pick it up and you'll walk out of the house and there won't be an Eruv, in order to have somebody teach you the brachas, teach you to do the nanuim. And you'll accidentally carry it in Rishus Harabim. So, and therefore the reason on Chol HaMoed you don't do it on Shabbos is you might come to carry it. Now, as we pointed out, Rabbah is picking up on hints in the Mishnah. The Mishnah already spoke about you would bring it to the shul ahead of time, you would bring it to the Beis Hamikdash ahead of time. It spoke about if somebody accidentally carried it on Shabbos in order to do the mitzvah, they're exempt from a chatas because they were being involved in a mitzvah. But nevertheless, it clearly acknowledges that there's this real concern of carrying. So Rabbah says that's the reason that it is not done on Chol HaMoed. I should say 2 things. First of all, as I already said yesterday, that's Rabbah's reason. It's not in the Mishnah. It's possible that there were other reasons as well, and we'll discuss some. Maybe if Yerushalmi doesn't really have Rabbah's reason. Anyway, we'll discuss other possibilities a little bit as we continue. But that's Rabbah's explanation, and that's assumed to be the reason. Although again, we should note that it's not necessarily stated earlier than Rabbah. Number 2, the fact that Rabbah says that they forbade you to take lulav because of this concern, and let's actually read the next line. The next line isn't even Rabbah. The next line is the Gemara commenting on Rabbah. V'hainu time of the shofar, v'hainu time of the Megillah. By the way, that's also the reason you don't blow shofar on Shabbos when it's Yontif Shabbos, when Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, and it's the reason you don't read the Megillah. This isn't relevant to us because the 14th never falls out on Shabbos, but in Yerushalayim, walled cities, you don't read, and the Gemara could have happened, you don't read Megillah on Shabbos because of a concern that you'll carry it. Now again, the Mishnayos are clear that you don't blow shofar on Shabbos, and they're clear you don't read Megillah on Shabbos. The reason is not said. The reason here is taken from Rabbah and extended to these cases. Now, it should be noted that when there's a whole debate, as you might be aware, about whether you need what constitutes a Rishus Harabim to be a biblical Rishus Harabim. The Gemara speaks about wide major streets, but the Gaonim have the requirement of 600,000 people using it. That requirement is not mentioned anywhere in the Gemara. Because of that requirement, that allows us often to have an Eruv, to assume we're not dealing with a real Rishus Harabim. Sometimes the phrase even becomes, there's no Rishus Harabim nowadays, to which, of course, the response is, what? And in the time of the Gemara and then the Mishnah, there were 600,000 people who would use major streets. Where did that happen? And part of the challenge to that idea that you'd have that criteria for Rishus Harabim is the fact that we make these gezeras of not doing a mitzvah d'oraisa, like blowing shofar or taking lulav, because you might accidentally carry, and that gezerah would only be if there's a real concern of biblical transgression. Well, clearly then it suggests the idea that Rishus Harabim was a prevalent reality in the time of the Mishnah and Gemara, if that would have been the basis for forbidding you to do these biblical mitzvot. So that's a critique that some people raise against the idea, Rishonim raise, that there's this 600,000 criteria, because that would make Rishus Harabim very rare, and it does not sound, if it becomes the basis for completely not doing a biblical mitzvah, it doesn't sound like it's so rare. So that's just an interesting point about that discussion. It's also an interesting issue. Tosfos and Rashi discuss why it says carry it for Amos and Rishus Harabim rather than carrying it from your house out into the street, which is the more immediate thing you would do, is you would step out of your house, right? So Tosfos says, well, it's more obvious there. When you make that transition indoors to outdoors, there are more signals to you to stop you. You'll be aware, I can't step out of the house, it's Shabbos. Whereas once you're in the street, of course, how did you get it out to the street to carry it for almost if you didn't bring it out of your house? Anyway, but that is an issue that gets raised as well. But this idea of a concern of carrying is the explanation that is given by Rab and then extended by the Gemara to explain Lulav, Shofar, and Megillah, why we don't do it on Shabbat.
Right.
Yes.
Did I understand correctly? Did you say that the descriptor of 600,000 as a defining criterion is Ga'anik, it's not the Gemara?
Right. I mean, the Godim claim that it is true to the Gemara. They don't say they're making it up, but it is not mentioned anywhere in the Gemara. That is correct.
Rabbi's second generation Amora?
Yes. I believe that's correct. Yes. All right. So now the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, Ihachi says the Gemara 2 lines from the top, Yom Rishonami. If that is the concern, you might carry it, then you should not be able to do it even when Yom Tov falls out, even if the first day Yom Tov is Shabbos. Now again, we don't do it. But again, remember, in the Mishnah, they would do it in the Beis HaMikdash, and out of the Beis HaMikdash, they would take Lulav on first day Yom Tov, even if it was Shabbos. So if, says the Gemara, your concern is you might carry it, what makes the first day special? So the Gemara says, Rishon hatakinu liRabbanan beveiso. No, the first day after that big, a mess in the Beis HaMikdash that with the fighting and all of that, they said take it at home. Don't leave your house with your lulav. So there's no concern that people will come to carry it. So the Gemara says, 1 minute. If that's true, hateinach acher takana, that's fine after they had all that fighting and they made the takana. But kodem takana mai, but it was clear from the Mishnah that before they had that takana, they were still taking it on Shabbos. That's why they brought it to Shul the day before, so they could take it on Shabbos. So clearly, even before the takana that you have to bring it at home, they were allowed to take it on Shabbos on the first day. Why is that? If it's a concern, you might come to carry. So the Gemara says, Michael Amemar, what can you say? Ella, fine. Here's the difference, which is the obvious difference. Rishon the Isamina Torah Bigvul in the first day, which is a biblical mitzvah, even out of the Beis Hamikdash. Lo Gazer Bahu Rabbanan. The rabbi said, "We'll let you take it the first day, even though it's Shabbos. We're not going to be so concerned you'll carry that we won't negate the biblical mitzvah. We'll let you go ahead and take it. Obviously, prepare, bring it to shul ahead of time. Don't carry, but we're going to let you take it on the first day Yontiv, which is biblical." Lo Gazru Bu Rabbanan. 1 minute. Hanach, the other days of Chol HaMoed, the less Numina Torah B'Gvulin, that is not a biblical mitzvah out of the Beis HaMikdash. Gazru Bu Rabbanan, there, the rabbi said, no, I'm sorry, don't take it on Chol HaMoed. You can take it on the first day, which is biblical, not the other days. Now, why did the Gemara have to say, is biblical out of the Beis HaMikdash, not out of the Beis HaMikdash? Just say, first day is biblical, they let you take it. The other days are rabbinic, they didn't let you take it if it's Shabbos. And the answer is, because you'll remember, our Mishnah is talking about in the Beis Hamikdash, right? Our Mishnah says, how would you take it? You'd bring it up to the Beis Hamikdash, Erev Shabbos, etc. So our Mishnah that's talking in the Beis Hamikdash says you would take the lulav 7 days if the first day Yontiv was Shabbos, and 6th day if Shabbos fell out on Chol HaMoed. So our Mishnah makes it clear that if Shabbos fell out on Chol HaMoed, you would not take it on Shabbos even in the Beis Hamikdash. Our Mishnah is describing what they would do in the Beis Hamikdash and says they would not take it on Shabbos Chol HaMoed. So the question is, why not? In the Beis Hamikdash, even on Chol HaMoed, it's biblical. So if biblical is a reason to take it on Shabbos, let me take it on Chol HaMoed. So the answer is no, because even though it's biblical here in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not biblical out of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it's not weighty enough to take it on Shabbos. Our concern of carrying will override. So that's the Gemara's answer. We have a concern about carrying. We're not going to let you take it on Chol HaMoed, where it's not biblical out of the Beis Hamikdash, and even in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not as weighty because it's most of the place it's not biblical. That concern of carrying will override. But the first day, where it's biblical for everyone, that day that you can take it even on Shabbos, the mitzvah is more important in that context than the concern you might forget and you might carry. Okay, so that's according to the Mishnah that you did take it on Shabbos. Now we're going to have to get to the question about, but we don't take it on Shabbos. So what's that about? Yes.
So when we say that the biblical mitzvah overrides the concern of carrying on Shabbos, that means that it's mutter to carry on Shabbos?
No. Absolutely not. Absolutely. No. Well, I was trying not to be ambiguous, but I'll repeat it. That all it is that that obviously you can, even if there's a biblical mitzvah, you cannot violate Shabbat. The whole discussion earlier was if you accidentally violated Shabbat in the performance of the mitzvah, does that get you off of a chata? But clearly it's prohibited. The question always is, though, we have these concerns. How much, are you going to let those concerns override other important things that need to be done? So the question is, we will let you take it on first day Yom Tov on Shabbos. Obviously, you have to be sure you don't carry. Bring it to the Beis HaMikdash on Friday. Bring it to your shul on Friday. If you didn't bring it to your shul, make sure not to take it out of your house. But we're still going to let you take it and say we're not going to be so concerned you might forget that we're going to stop you from doing the biblical mitzvah. So the prohibition, of course, completely exists. But if it's the first day and it's biblical, we're going to say take precautions, but do the mitzvah. We're not going to let our anxieties and our concerns override that.
So it's similar to a Greek Milah and Shabbat, is that all the things have to be prepared.
Exactly. Okay. So that's the position right now, that yes, obviously it's completely forbidden to do it, to carry it on Shabbat, even if you're doing the mitzvah, but are we going to stop you from doing it? Are we going to trust you to take the necessary precautions? So here we're saying that in the Mishnah it's clear you could take it on Shabbat as long as you took the necessary precautions. When it's a biblical mitzvah, everywhere on the first day, we are going to trust you to take the necessary precautions. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. If that's true, says the Gemara, ha'idna nami. So nowadays, why don't we take it nowadays on first day Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, right? The Mishnah says you do. Why don't we do it? So the Gemara says, Anan lo yadina b'kivua diyarcha. We don't know when exactly Rosh Chodesh is, which doesn't mean we literally don't know because we have a fixed calendar, but it means we act as if we don't know. We live outside of Eretz Yisrael in a reality of, keeping 2 days Yom Tov, of pretending like we lived at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, where we weren't sure if we lived outside of Israel when they established Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, we can't say, today it's definitely biblical, because we're living in this virtual reality as if it was the time of the Beis HaMikdash, where we would never know exactly, is this the first day Yom Tov or is tomorrow the first day Yom Tov? So because we're in that uncertainty, or in that virtual uncertainty, that mock uncertainty, as it were, we do not therefore take it on the first day. So the Gemara says, fine, but Inahu, the Yadi B'Kivua Diyarcha, those who live in Israel, who don't live in that virtual uncertainty, they live as if they know when Rosh Chodesh was made, meaning they live in that reality that they would be at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, where they would know when Rosh Chodesh was. So, for people who live in Israel and only keep 1 day Yom Tov, so Lidchi, let it override. Why don't they take the lulav on the first day Yom Tov on Shabbos in Israel, like they did at the time of the Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Ein achinami. You know what? You're right. They do. The Tani Chada, because one Mishnah says, "B'Yom Tov Harishon Shachal Shachalios b'Shabbos Kol HaMolichin Es Lulavim Lahar Bayis." Our Mishnah says that when Yom Tov fell out on Shabbos, they would bring their lulavim to the Beis HaMikdash from the day before. V'Tanan Idach, and the other Mishnah said that we learned at the end of last parak, LeBeis HaKnesset, that on Erev Shabbos they would bring it to the shul. So Shmamina. So what's the explanation? Would they bring it to the Beis HaMikdash or would they bring it to the shul? Now, could be, depends how close you live to the Beis HaMikdash. But the Gemara is going to translate it the following way. Kan bizman Beis HaMikdash kayim, kan bizman she'ein Beis HaMikdash kayim. That it's talking about two different times of history. At the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they would bring it on Friday to the Beis HaMikdash. When they're after the Beis HaMikdash, they would bring it on Friday to their local shuls. So you shmamina. So that is a good proof. So right now, what the Gemara is saying is the fact that an earlier Mishnah said they would bring it to the shuls on Erev Shabbos means when there was no longer a Beis HaMikdash, they would still go ahead and take it at shul on Shabbos. You'd prepare ahead of time and you take it on shul Shabbos, and that shows you that nowadays in Eretz Yisrael, at least, it shows you that you could take the lulav on Shabbos. So according to the conclusion of the Gemara here, now there's not going to be the conclusion at the end of the daf. But right now, the Gemara is basically concluding that in Eretz Yisrael, when the first day Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, thank you so much, you would actually take the lulav on the first day Yom Tov. Anybody ever been in Eretz Yisrael on Sukkot? Have we ever been in there to Saul and Sukkot on the first day Yontif falls out on Shabbos? No, do we take it on Shabbos? No, we don't take it on Shabbos. But right now, that is the Gemara's conclusion, and the Gemara is saying that's pshat of the Mishnah that says that they would take it to Shul Erev Shabbos. It's talking even nowadays with no Beis Hamikdash. That's what you do in Israel. Now, the Gemara is going to reject that later, but right now, that is the position of the Gemara. So we're going to circle back to that. The other question to ask, which we'll circle back to, is why it's more taken for granted, for example, that shofar was not taken, was not blown on, well, let me take a minute to talk about that right now. So according to this, the Mishnah says that lulav was taken on Shabbos, at least, out of the Beis Hamikdash, at least in Israel. And the Gemara even thinks that that's what we do nowadays. But if anybody ever learned Rosh Hashanah, you learn that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, they didn't do it in the locally in the shows. They maybe did it in the Beis Hamikdash, but they didn't do it locally. So what's the difference? What on shofar on Shabbos? So why is it when Rosh Hashanah? By the way, it's the same year. If Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. Why is it that if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, they never took it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, blew it outside the Beis Hamikdash, whereas if Sukkot fell out on Shabbos, according to this, they would take it outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And according to the Gemara even thinks even up till today. So what's the difference? So Tosfos says two important differences. Number one is that shofar, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, basically almost nobody knew when Rosh Hashanah was, right? By Sukkot, there were 2 weeks to find out when the first day of Sukkot was, because, it had been determined 2 weeks ago. On Rosh Hashanah, only people in the immediate environs of the Beis Hamikdash knew. So following the idea that the Gemara said before, we do have concerns you might come to carry it. Is that going to stop us from doing the mitzvah? Well, the less we're certain we're doing a biblical mitzvah today, because today might not be the first day of Yontiv, then the less we're going to allow you to go ahead and do it. So one easy explanation why it was clear you don't blow the shofar on Shabbos and not so clear about the lulav was because it was a lot less clear that what was the first day of Rosh Hashanah. That's an easy answer. The other answer Tosfos says gets to another point I was making, which is that there are other explanations other than a concern of carrying, which might inform why you don't do it on Shabbos. And so it says, when you're taking the lulav, all you're doing is you're just moving something, like maybe it's a muktzah thing, big deal. That's not considered a big challenge to the idea of Shabbos. So therefore, on the first day Yontiv, we'll let you take it. Whereas by shofar, you're blowing a shofar. That's like a musical instrument. That's a skilled labor. It's not technically a malacha, but it is like a skill, like a craft and a skill to blow and play a musical instrument. So that is intrinsically more problematic on Shabbos. So therefore, it was always obvious that you weren't going to blow the shofar on Shabbos out of the Beis Hamikdash. Whereas by lulav, which it's less of a real violation of Shabbos, at an experiential level, it's just shaking something, so it's rabbinic and it's not the same degree of problematic. And it's more obvious what day is the first day of Yontiv. That's why, according to the Mishnah, you would take the lulav even on Shabbos if the first day Yontiv fell out on Shabbos. Okay, so according to the Gemara, you would do it by the lulav, at least in Israel, where you would know when Rosh Chodesh would be, maybe not in Bavel, but yes, in Israel. And we're still going to have to figure out why we don't do it nowadays. But lulav is in the Mishnah more accepted to be done on Shabbos than the blowing of the shofar, which it's taken for granted is not. Okay, let's now continue in the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. Okay, the Isa Minator Bigvuli Minolan. Where do you know that it's a mitzvah to take the lulav outside of the Beis Hamikdash on the first day? Pretty funny. It's pretty clear pasuk. The bigger chiddush is that it's a mitzvah in the Beis Hamikdash for the whole week. But okay, the Tanya we taught in the Brisa. Ulkachtem, you shall take for yourselves a beautiful fruit, etc. So l'kachtem in the plural, shatei l'kicha b'yad kol echad v'echad. We discussed this before. The plural language means one person doesn't take it for the collective, but every individual takes it. Mishelachem, l'kachtem lachem, and also lachem, l'kachtem is every individual. Lachem, for you. Mishelachem, it means it has to belong to you. These are things we've seen before. On the first day, you can't use a borrowed or stolen lulav. Bayom, on the first, Bayom Harishon is the verse. Vafilu b'Shabbos. The day means whatever happens on that day it's going to be done regardless, even if it falls out, even if it's Shabbos. Rishon, the first day. Afilu b'Gvulit, even, meaning that's just pshat of the psukim. The first day, everybody has a mitzvah. The idea lifnei Hashem, which is said at the end, which is understood to be the Beis Hamikdash, that's for the whole week. But Rishon, no qualifiers. Rishon, everybody has the obligation on the first day. Harishon, the extra hey, the first. That the idea that we said before that it's by Yom, it takes place even on Shabbos, that's only on Harishon. That's only on the first day, not on the other days, even in the Beis Hamikdash. So this is basically an asmachta. The Gemara is going to try to read it like it's a real drasha, but the fact that it basically is learning from the pasuk that you can do it even on Shabbos, but only the first day you can do it on Shabbos, not Chol HaMoed that you can't do on Shabbos, right? That's basically a rabbinic issue about yes, doing it on Shabbos, not doing it on Shabbos, only the first day, not Chol HaMoed. So this is sort of hanging that on a pasuk. By Yom, even on Shabbos. Harishon, but only Shabbos is on the first day. Can you do it on Shabbos? On Chol HaMoed, not. So that's what's going on here. But the Gemara is going to try to read this not as an asmachta, but as a real drasha. So let's see what the Gemara does with it. Yeah.
How do you make that determination?
That it's an asmachta? Yes. Well, I don't, because the Gemara is going to actually try to claim that it's a real drasha.
Right.
But
what
the
gave
fact,
you the idea to even raise?
Well, first of all, because it does happen in Midrash Halacha, and the Gemara says it explicitly, and also because the difference about can you do it on Shabbos on the first day Yontif as opposed to Chol HaMoed, we've clearly indicated before our rabbinic concerns, right? So those aren't biblical issues. So we know from a minute ago that those are rabbinic concerns. So clearly, then, if it's following the what we laid out earlier, then it has to be just an asmachta. But the Gemara is going to try to read it as a real drasha. So let's see what the Gemara says.
Can I ask one last question about that? So in general, is it accurate to say that if we do have a situation where it's an asmachta and not a real drasha, it's generally to support a rabbinic concern, or sometimes do they have an asmachta when it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai?
You could have a asmachta. It's rare to have an asmachta for halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Although you had it before, right. When in the beginning of the Masechet you had it about shiurim. Eretz chitav v'seorah kol hapasuk hazeh shiurim ne'emar. Right. And the Gemara says that those shiurim are really halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and this is really an asmachta. Yeah. So well, but the drasha didn't say it. First, it presented it as that the whole thing, that all the shiurim are learned out from that pasuk, and then the Gemara says, no, really, we know shiurim halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's an asmachta. So you do have it. All right. So the Gemara now continues. Amar Mar. Bayom va'afilu b'Shabbos. So you can take it on the first day, even on Shabbos. Michti. Let's take a look, says the Gemara. Tiltu ba'amahu. It's just muktzah. It's Trechkral and Mishrei Tiltu. How could you have a real biblical drasha to say, oh, you could take the lulav on Shabbos? It's a rabbinic concern. What would a biblical pasuk be teaching you about that? Clearly, you don't need a pasuk to tell me it's you override muktzah. So the Gemara says, no. Michti Tiltu ba'amahu. It's Amar Rabba says, Amar Rava, excuse me, so he, rather than saying it's an asmachta, he says you really do need the pasuk. And what the pasuk is coming to do, it's coming to allow you to prepare the lulav on Shabbos. Even if you really have to violate Shabbos, you're allowed to make it on Shabbos. Now, we don't paskin that way. This follows, though, the position of Valiba the High Tana, the following Tana. The Tanya we taught in the Brisa. Lulav, the Kol Machshira of Dochen as a Shabbos, Diva Rabbi Eliezer. So there actually is a position that you can violate Shabbat in order to do Lulav. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Now, we know, for example, there are two things that are chidushim in this statement. For example, there are some mitzvot that violate Shabbat, like Brit Milah. You Brit Milah, not violate, but override Shabbat. Let's say you didn't do the necessary preparations ahead of time. You didn't sharpen the knife. You have to carry the scalpel or whatever it is across Rosh Hashanah in order to do the Brit Milah and so on. Are you allowed to do the preparations for the Brit Milah on Shabbat or just the act of the Brit Milah? So Rabbi Eliezer comes along with this tremendous chiddush and says the Machshirei Milah are also Dechos Shabbos. He basically even says if you need to chop down a tree to make a fire in order to heat up your knife, to sharpen your knife on Shabbos for the Brit Milah, you're allowed to do it. Okay, so that's a tremendous chiddush. You can do all these preparations that you could have taken care of ahead of time, not just the act. But that's one thing is to say it in the context of Brit Milah, where the act itself we already does override Shabbat. And then he does, well, once the act overrides Shabbat, even all the preparations would override as well. Here, by Lulav, he's going one step further, because Lulav in itself doesn't override Shabbat. We never have an idea that, oh, you're allowed to violate Shabbat in order to take Lulav. So he says two chidushim. Number one is actually you can. Let's say, I don't know what the scenario would be, but somehow if you had to carry the lulav in order to be yotzei the lulav, you had to bring it in a Rosh Hashanah. No, actually, here's a better example. You had to chop down the lulav from the tree. It's still connected to the tree or something. He says that number one, the mitzvah of lulav overrides Shabbat. Well, that's a machshirim to chop it down from the tree. The mitzvah overrides Shabbat, and the preparations override Shabbat.
But you can't eat lunch in your mother-in-law's sukkah on Sukkot.
Because same Rabbi Eliezer, that's true. So I don't know what to tell you about that. So anyway, it's a tremendous chiddush. Number one is when you start with a mitzvah that's acknowledged that it overrides Shabbat, like Brit Milah. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you could do all the preparations. And number two, that he says that lulav, even though the Torah never tells you it overrides Shabbat, he says actually lulav does override Shabbat. And you could do lulav and all the preparations to get a lulav on Shabbat. So when this drasha that says that lulav overrides Shabbat, that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer actually does say that it overrides biblical violations of Shabbat in order to do lulav, because it's something that has to be done today. It's like the same way we say b'moado allows you to do a Pesach on Shabbat, So lulav, today's the day for lulav. You can violate Shabbat in order to do lulav. Amazing idea. Okay, we don't paskin this way. So he says, lulav v'kol machshirav dochin es Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. My time of the Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? Amakra, because of what we just said. Bayom, on the first day, vafilu b'Shabbat. So the same like b'moado by Pesach means even on Shabbat. Bayom harishon by lulav means even on Shabbat. Whatever you need to do. Okay, for Rabbanan, hi biyom avdilei. So what does the rabbis do with the word bayom? Mi bayale, they need it. Bayom below belayla. More simple drasha that the mitzvah of lulav is a day lulav. It's not is a day mitzvah. It's not a night mitzvah. Rabbi Eliezer biyom below belayla minale. Where does he know lulav is only a daytime mitzvah? Nafkalemi save the dekra. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem elokechem shivas yamim. Rejoice before God 7 days, which is then the mitzvah of lulav in the Beis Hamikdash for 7 days. Yomim v'lo leilos, only days, not nights. It's a day mitzvah. That's where he learns it from. For Rabbanan, the rabbis, what do you do with the yamim by the end of the pasuk? Since you already know the idea that it's a daytime mitzvah. Ime hasam, had it just been the end of the pasuk, haviyamina leilif yamim yamim misukah. The words days by the 7 days would not have told me daytime only, because there's another idea of days in the plural by sukkahs, which means daytime and nighttime. So, malahol and yami va'afilu leilot, the same way days in the plural by sukkahs means all the days, day and night. Afkan, maybe if it just been the end of the pasuk by rejoicing before God 7 days, nami yami mafilu leilos, I would have said it meant night. So therefore, I needed to say yom in the singular and to say it again. And if you say 7 days, that's a sense of the whole continuity of time, which includes the night times. 1 day and the singular and only talking about one suggests daytime. So that's what Yom is teaching me. I could not have learned it out from the word Yamim. I need the word Yom, and it is not to tell me that Lulav overrides Shabbat. Lulav does not override Shabbat. Okay? So the Gemara says, V'hasam Sukkah gufa minolan, and where do you know that Sukkah itself applies even at night? The Tana Rabbanan, we taught in a Braita. Pasukos stage Shivas Yamim, dwell in a Sukkah 7 days. Yamim vafilu leilos, days means even the intervening nights. Ata omer yamim vafilu leilos. You say day, even nights. Awein ali yamim v'lo leilos. Maybe days means even sukkah is only a daytime mitzvah. V'dinu, and I can make it a logical derivation about that. Nemer kan yamim. It says by sukkah days, 7 days. V'nemer belulav yamim. It says by lulav days, 7 days, at least in the Beis Hamikdash. Mal halan yamim v'lo leilos. The same way there. Here we're assuming we know the end result. The same way there we know it's a daytime mitzvah. Afkan yamim v'lo leilos. Maybe sukkahs is also only a daytime mitzvah. So that would be an argument that sukkahs would only be daytime. Oh, klach l'derech zo. Or maybe go on this path, in a different way. Nemer kan yamim. It says by sukkah 7 days. The nemer b'miluim yamim. We've had this before, learning sukkah from miluim, which is actually sort of the context of some of the parshiot these days. So, and it says by the time that the Kohanim would stay in the Mishkan when it was being initially constructed. So they should say 7 days. Yom v'layla. That's explicit. It says dwell in the Mishkan Yom v'layla. So Malvahalan Yami Vafilu Lelos, Afkan Yami Vafilu Lelos. The same way there, it's day and night, which is explicit in the pasuk. Sukkah is also day and night. So you can compare it to Miluim, you can compare it to lulav. So Nira Lemidoma. Let's figure out which one it's more similar to. Let's prove sukkah from Miluim because they apply the entire day, meaning it's not one moment in time. Like it's just a continuity. You're in the Beis Hamikdash. They were in the Mishkan 7 days straight, continuously. You sit in a sukkah. It's a continuous mitzvah. And let's not use as an example lulav, which is a momentary act, to apply to lulav. So to apply to sukkah and the miluim are very similar. It's a continuity of living. So if the miluim, it's a continuity of living with nights, the same is true by sukkah. And you should not try to learn it out from lulav, which is a momentary single act. That's a very logical point. Also, you could even say that miluim is a similar, act that you're doing. It's dwelling in a place. So you're dwelling in the Mishkan, you're dwelling in the Sukkah. That's much more comparable than learning it out from lulav, which is a single, distinct type of an act. Or go on this way. Let's learn out from sort of a mitzvah that applies in all generations, sukkah and lulav. And let's not prove it from miluim. It was a one-time thing. It was not an ongoing mitzvah. So which one is it? Is it like miluim or is it like lulav? Is it a nighttime mitzvah sukkah or only a daytime mitzvah? Talmud Lomar. So the verse teaches. Teishvu l'gzeira shava. By sukkah it says basukos teishvu, and by miluim it says you shall dwell. Teishvu yomam balayla. So the same verb links the two. And again, it's not even just one of those technical gzeira shavas. It actually is the same action. In both the miluim and the sukkah, you're dwelling in a place for 7 days. So nemer kan teishvu, by basukos teishvu, v'nemer b'miluim teishvu, you shall dwell day and night. So the same way there, day and night, here, day and night. So again, this is repeating something we've seen before, learning part of the aspects of the mitzvah of sukkah from the miluim, a dwelling in a place for 7 days. And we pointed out at the time, this connects to other themes about sukkah, about sort of the presence of God, and the same way the Kohanim were in the Mishkan for 7 days, and the Mikdash connection, and so on. Anyway, for us, it's just a wrap-up of the discussion that Rabbi Eliezer learns from the word Yom by lulav, that it overrides Shabbat and really overrides biblical Shabbat, whereas the Chachamim say Yom just means daytime. And then it gets to this issue about, and so it's because we know that Sukkah, that means nighttime. So Yamim by Sukkah means including night, because we see by Miluim. So you need the Yom by lulav to say no, lulav is not like Sukkah, and it's only daytime, not nighttime.
So Sukkah is not a mitzvah to Aseh Shezman Brahma?
It is. It's grama for 7 days, but it's not. I mean, it's not within those 7 days. It's continuous, but it's not. But the Aseh Shezman grama means that it only applies 7 days out of the year.
So Shabbos is a mitzvah to Aseh Shezman grama.
Well, Shabbos anyway. You have the lot Aseh, and the Aseh is linked to the lot Aseh. So yes, so that's why Shabbos is not part of that discussion. Okay. All right. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, so that is the end of the discussion for now about lulav on Shabbat. The radical idea of Rabbi Eliezer that mamish overrides biblical Shabbat. The idea that for us it overrides when it is doraita. We know what the first day is in Eretz Yisrael. We would obviously it would not override Shabbat. You'd prepare it ahead of time. You'd bring it to a shul ahead of time and so on. But we would allow you to take it on Shabbat. That's what the Gemara is saying. That is not our practice even in Israel, and we will see when we get to the end of the daf how that switches. But right now we're working with the Mishnayot that you would take it in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, at least even on Shabbat on the first day. Okay, so now we turn to the second part of the Mishnah, which is the arava, the waving of the willows. So in the Beit HaMikdash, again, the Mishnah is situated in the Beit HaMikdash. So it says that they would take the arava 6 and 7 days. Because what they would do in the Mikdash is actually, if you turn, let's turn the page for a minute, turn to Mem Hey Amud Aleph, so you see how the Mishnah describes what they would do with the arava in the Beit HaMikdash. So on Mem Hey Amud Aleph, the Mishnah here reads the following. Mitzvah arava ketzad. What would be the mitzvah of taking the arava, again, in the Beit HaMikdash? Malkom haya l'matam Yerushalayim v'nikra motza. Yordim l'shamim v'laktim misham murbiot shel arava. So they'd go to this place and they'd get all of these big branches of aravas. Uboin v'zokvinos on betzidei hamizbeach. They would sort of stick them in the ground by the edge of the altar. V'roshayim kfufim al gabi hamizbeach, and their heads would like lean over, hang over the top of the altar. Now these would basically be the Kohanim would do this, okay, because only the Kohanim were allowed on all sides of the altar. V'tiku v'yiriu v'tiku, and they do tkiya trua tkiya. So this is what they would do for 7 days in the Beis Hamikdash. They would do a sticking of a rubber branches around the Mizbeach. Okay, look, very, obviously evoke that whole theme of water, like we bring vegetation into the shul and flowers or whatever. So this, we do it on Shavuos. Anyway, they'd have, surrounded by aravas, the Mizbeach every day of 7 days. So now you sort of see where we get our basis for Hoshanas. Every day they would march around the Mizbeach once. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Aniva Hu Hoshiana. Also Hayom, that day, meaning day 7, which we've learned is a special day for our Rava, Makivin is a Mizbeach Sheva Pamim, 7 times. Okay, our Hoshana Rabbah. So let's take a look now back at the Gemara. So our Mishnah said that this Arava thing they would do for 7 days in the Beit HaMikdash. If the 7th day fell out on Shabbos, they would do it even on Shabbos. If one of the other days fell out on Shabbos, then they would not do it on Shabbos, then they would not do it on Shabbat. Okay, so sometimes 6, sometimes 7, depending on whether Shabbos fell out on the 7th day or not. So the Gemara says like this: Arava b'shvi, my time of Dachya Shabbos. Why does it override Shabbos on the 7th day? Okay, meaning, we've already introduced the idea that if we shouldn't do it on Shabbos because it might lead to Shabbos violation. That we introduced when talking about Lulav. Now, why then did Lulav we allow the first day? Because the first day was biblical. So why by a Rava, what's special about the 7th day? We got the problem. Problem is you might come to lead to Shabbos violation. What's special about the 7th day, that when the 7th day was Shabbos, we let it to be done on the 7th day? So let's take a look. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kidei lefarsima shehi min haTorah, in order to publicize that it's biblical. Now, maybe this is the first you're hearing that it's biblical, right? Where is it? How do you know it's biblical? Torah never says do the aravas in the Beis Hamikdash. So you might remember a Gemara earlier that mentioned 2 drashot. One was arvei nachal, arvei in the plural, achas lelulav, va'achas lemikdash, I think was the phrase, that there was the double language said that there was a separate mitzvah of arava in the Beis Hamikdash and was learned from the double language arvei. And another approach said it's not learned from the word arvei, it's just a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Okay, but the assumption is that this ritual of the arava in the Beis Hamikdash is biblical. So Rabbi Yochanan says, so we have to make sure, allow it one day to override Shabbat. Again, it's not a biblical violation. It's just overriding concerns, right? We're not going to be concerned that it will lead to a Shabbos violation. Okay, we have to allow it one day on Shabbat so people should understand this is not just some crazy ritual. This is a real biblical thing. And they'll see that because they'll see that we'll even do it sometimes on Shabbat. Okay, so that's what he said. But again, no Shabbos violation is actually taking place. Today, to publicize that this really is something that is biblical. So the Gemara says, if that's true, let lulav on Chol HaMoed override as well. So people should know that it's biblical. Now, what's biblical? The first day people know it's biblical. But what might people not realize by lulav is biblical? The other days, right? So here the point is you're doing this in the Beit HaMikdash, okay? And people might not realize that the Arava is biblical, so we let Arava be done on Shabbat. People might not realize, says the Gemara, that the other days of Lulav in the Beit HaMikdash is biblical. So let's allow another day to override Shabbat, not only the first day. So the Gemara says, no, Lulav Gzeira Mishum Derabba. We can't let you take Lulav on Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash on Chol HaMoed. You might come to carry. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Arava Nami Nigzur. So same issue. So you're basically saying don't worry about Rabbah's concerns in order to publicize. So if you want to say so, why is still Lulav different than Arava? We know what the concerns are, but by Arava we want to publicize. So let's also publicize Lulav. That Lulav in the Beis HaMikdash is biblical on Chol HaMoed. So the Gemara says no. Arava shluchei beistin ma'isila. Lulav l'chol masor. Arava is handled by shluchei beistin. Meaning, what happened? If you remember, we just read the Mishnah.
Right.
It says they would send down people, they'd gather the aravas. Arava was done. It was not basically a big public thing. Even arava in the Beis Hamikdash, messengers of Beis Din would gather the aravas. Who would put the aravas by the mizbeach? Kohanim. It would not be a big public thing. So therefore, we can allow it to be done on Shabbos, and we're not so concerned. Whereas lulav, when it was done in the Beis Hamikdash, what did we read in the Mishnah? We read that everybody came to the Beis Hamikdash. There, those concerns are going to be heightened concerns. Now, the other day, I think it was Sam, I think it was you asked, so I don't get it, but at least let the Kohanim take it in the Beis Hamikdash on Chol HaMoed, the lulav, right? So Tosfos basically addresses that. And Tosfos says, look, if we're not letting, fundamentally it's something that everybody could do. So once we're disallowing everybody to do the lulav on Shabbos, we're not going to only allow the Kohanim. But as opposed to the Arava, which starts by something that is uniquely a Kohen ritual, so there, it's not like you don't do it and you do it. In general, it's only done by the Kohanim. That we can allow on Shabbat. So what is the Gemara saying? The Gemara is saying the following. There's no biblical violation in any of this. It's all rabbinic concerns. Are we going to allow those rabbinic concerns to get in the way of doing the mitzvah? By lulav, we're going to let you do the biblical mitzvah on the first day where everybody has it. But we're not going to let you do it in the Beis HaMikdash on Chol HaMoed, even though it's biblical in the Beis HaMikdash on Chol HaMoed. We're not going to allow it. In contrast, Arava, which is biblical in the Beis HaMikdash, but only in the Beis HaMikdash, we will allow on day 7, in order that people should realize how important it is, that it is a biblical idea. So let's allow lulav on Chol HaMoed because it's biblical in the Beis HaMikdash, and let people know that it's biblical in the Beis HaMikdash. No, lulav is too much of a public event. So we're only going to allow it on day 1 where it is biblical for everyone. We're not going to allow it on the other days. A rava, which is a more controlled ritual and limited ritual, that we will allow even we will allow in the Beis HaMikdash, even on Shabbat, when the 7th day is Shabbat, so that people are aware that this is a biblical mitzvah in the Beis HaMikdash. Yes.
Do you have any thought? There's so many korbanot offered on Sukkot. How do you do that with all these branches covering over on the Mizbeach?
I mean, the Mizbeach was big. It was 32 amot. It was like 50 feet.
No!
They're surrounding the base, and there's a little overhang at the edges. Like, imagine you just have like a little canopy, like on top of you, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, no, I get it.
No,
I want to see.
You want to see me draw it?
Yeah.
Where's the illustration?
It looks like it's filling now.
It's like
too big, right?
It's like Jim Nagy.
All right, whatever. Anyway. However it was, okay? Anyway, now it looks like, I don't know what it looks like. Anyway, these didn't jut out as much, but okay. You get the idea. Anyway, fine. Whatever they did. Okay, anyway. All right. They had little things. Anyway, fine, whatever. And then you had them going like this, right? And here are the things, and the carving would go up, and you'd have like little, it'd be very lovely. Right? What's the problem?
I want to see it go ahead.
All right, anyway.
32
amot at the base, yeah. 50 feet or so, yeah.
Base.
The base. It only went up, it only became like 28 at the top. It's not these big protrusions.
It's still pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. What?
They obviously left a path to get to.
Yeah, I mean, you have this. I mean, it wasn't
the
like.
parapets around the side, didn't it?
What? I mean,
They
yeah.
have Italian garden.
What? You just had something like that. But the overhang could have been like 10 feet higher, and you're still walking around here.
How high was it?
What?
How high was it?
How high was it? It was, how high was it? I'm trying to remember. I know it was 32 at the base, 12 amot or something. Yeah, something pretty
The
high.
whole willow tree.
Willow trees, they're
You can get,
but they are
okay.
tall trees.
Anyway, all right. Yes.
The calendar was engineered so that Hoshana Rabbah could not be.
Okay, so we're going to get back to that. That was not yet at the time that this was being written, but that will be the case. So let's keep on reading. So the Gemara says like this. Ihachi, says the Gemara. Kol yoma nami lidchi. So look, says the Gemara, why pick day 7? It's biblical every day. So let it always override Shabbos, Arava. Again, not override because there's no violation, but let it be done on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Asi lifakfuke belulav. No, that'll undermine the special nature of lulav. Now you're letting a rava override Shabbos whenever Shabbos falls out, and lulav can only be done on Shabbos on the first day. So you don't want a rava to be more important than lulav. So you have to give a Rava just one day that it can be done on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, "V'litchi b'yom tov rishon." Okay, let's make it the same day. When the first day Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, you do both lulav and a Rava. Why give it a separate day? So the Gemara says, no. Lo mucha milsa. It's not then obvious that a Rava is what's going on here, that it's because of a Rava. The whole point, the whole special nature of a Rava is lost. That was the whole point of allowing it to be done in the first place. Army, people will say, Lulav hu de kadachi. Oh yeah, you know why we're doing this stuff on Shabbos? Because we're doing it because of Lulav. Once we're doing it Lulav, we do the Arava thing as well. But nobody recognizes the importance of the Arava ritual. So the Gemara says, "V'litchi b'chad mehanach." That's okay. Fine. We get you want to give it only one day, not every day. You want to give it a distinct day. Why give it day 7? Give it one of the other days. It says no. Kivin de kamafkis la merishon. Once it can't be day 1, ukmashvi. You give it the 7th day. Any middle day gets lost. The beginning or the end are very distinct points. Okay. Now, by the way, that's interesting because as I read to you from the following Mishnah, and as we know in our experience, Hoshana Rabbah is a special day, right? And you do a whole thing, and you do it 7 times, and the whole thing. So why didn't the Gemara say here, the reason we gave it the day 7 was the day to override Shabbos, was day 7 was the big deal. It was Hoshana Rabbah, etc. It sounds a little bit from this Gemara that it worked in the opposite. That the reason day 7 became the big deal and became Hoshana Rabbah was because we needed to pick one special day for our Rava. And once it wasn't going to be day 1, we picked day 7. Now that's not normally the sense you get. Normally the sense you get is that you're building up to a climax, right? You walk around every day. It's sort of like the whole Yericho story, You do walk and then day 7, like that's when it all comes to a culmination. So it is funny that the Gemara didn't just say, because day 7 is the special day of a Rava. It sounds like it came through the back door. We had to pick a day to be the special day. It wasn't going to be day 1, so we'll pick day 7. All right, anyway, so the Gemara says like this. So let it override today. So today, why don't we do Hoshana Rabbah on Shabbos? Why don't we take it on Shabbos out of the Beis HaMikdash? Now, the point is, Rashi and Tosfos both asked, 1 minute. The only way we said that we allow it was because it was not a huge public ritual, that it was done just by the Kohanim, so what's this question, do it today? Today, it's become a public ritual. So they say, well, maybe we should do it today, and also like in a more controlled fashion, only somehow let it be done in a supervised way with shluchei beis din. It's a funny question, because we've already explained that the only way we were allowing it was because it was a more limited ritual. Anyway, let's see what the Gemara's answer is. We don't know when Rosh Chodesh is, so we don't really know which day is exactly day 7, or we pretend like we don't know, and therefore we don't have those earlier allowances. So the Gemara says, "Inu diyadi b'kivua diyarcha lidchi." So those in Eretz Yisrael that know when Rosh Chodesh is, let it be done. Why don't they do a Hoshana Rabbah ritual on Shabbos? So the Gemara says, Ki asa Bar Hedya Amra, when Bar Hedya came, he said, from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Lo ikla, it never happened. Hoshana Rabbah never fell out on Shabbos. Now, by the way, that is the way that our current calendar works. Because if anybody knows the basic mnemonic, anybody knows this? If you don't know this, you should learn this. It's Lo Adu Rosh and Lo B'du Pesach. So Rosh Hashanah never falls out on Sunday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot fall out. First day Sukkot fall out on the same day. So first day Sukkot never falls out on Sunday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now Hoshana Rabbah is which day of Sukkot? Day 7. So if Hoshana Rabbah were to be Shabbos, what day of the week would the first day of Sukkot have to be? If Hoshana Rabbah is Shabbos, it's not hard. If this is Shabbos, if this is Shabbos, and that's day 7, which Sunday is day 1, right? So if Hoshana Rabbah is on Shabbos, okay, then Sukkot would have to be on day 1, but it's Lo Adu Rosh. So in our current calendar, Hoshana Rabbah will never fall out on Shabbos, okay? So, but the time the Gemara was being written, they did not have the fixed calendar. But they just are saying it never fell out that way, which means that they constructed it so it would not fall out that way. Now that's a little bit bizarre, because the basic point is, you know what? If it were to fall out that way, it would override Shabbat. But we did not want to have to deal with that allowing this whole Hoshana ritual to override Shabbat, because it's not even biblical nowadays anymore. It's not in the Beis Hamikdash, so we made sure it would never actually happen. That was the first answer. So Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from Yisrael, V'kol Nechusei, and all those that made Yerida, that's what it literally means, with him, all those coming from Israel to Bavel, Amri, they said, Ikla. No, actually, it has fallen out on Shabbos. Below Idachi, and we didn't let it override. Now, why not? According to the Mishnah, you should override Shabbat. Hoshana Rabbah, or override, be done on Shabbat. Vela Kasha, but it's difficult. So Amr of Yosef, Man Leimelan to Arava Benetila. Who told you that the act of Arava that they would do in the Beis Hamikdash, that we said is done 7 days and is done on Shabbat, just means like the holding of the Arava and the walking around of the altar, like we mentioned. Dilma bizakifa. Remember, when we read the Mishnah, the first thing it points is that they would put it by the altar. And therefore what? So therefore he's saying, our current ritual of walking around on Hoshana Rabbah and whatever is not the ritual mentioned in the Mishnah. The ritual mentioned in the Mishnah is the putting of it by the side of the altar. And therefore, he says, it actually is something that we don't do nowadays. So your argument, if the Mishnah let it be done on Shabbos, let's do it nowadays on Shabbos. We don't do what was done in the Mishnah. The thing the Mishnah was talking about was putting it by the altar. What we do is a different thing. It's just the walking around. So Abai asked on this. Lulav Arava Shisha V'Shiva. You would do Lulav and Arava 6 and 7 days. My lav. So the fact that it's talking about Lulav and Arava in the same breath, Lulav Ki Arava. My lav Ki Lulav. It must mean that what you did was the Arava, like what you did by the Lulav. Ma Lulav Binatila. Af Arava Binatila. So the same way by Lulav, we're just talking about holding it. By Arava also. So yes, the ritual in the Mishnah is not the ritual of planting it by the altar. The ritual of the Mishnah is the marching with it. And we do it nowadays, and we should do it on Shabbos. So it says, Midi area, is that a proof? Hachidisa v'hachidisa. Each one is according to its parameters. So Lulav by holding, and the Rava, maybe the Mishnah was only talking about the planting by the altar. Okay, Esrei Abaye. Abaye is going to cry again. B'chol yom makivnes mizbeach pam achat. This is the Mishnah we read. Every day they walk around the altar once. V'oso yom sheva pamim. And that day, day 7, they'd walk around 7 times. My love, be'arava. So you see the Mishnah emphasizes the ritual of walking around. And it means walking around with the arava. So that's the ritual. And that we do, and that we do nowadays. And it says, lo, belulav. No, maybe the walking around, the arava ritual was just the putting it by the altar. And the walking around was what we did by the lulav. That's what we do nowadays, is we do a marching around with a lulav.
But we have our
All right, but it's not specifically the mitzvah of Arava. The mitzvah of Arava.
In other words, they're saying, yeah.
All right, the mitzvah of Arava that is underscored in the Mishnah, that's done 7 days, including Shabbos, is the mitzvah of the Mizbeach. That's the argument, which is not done today, which is why we don't do it on Shabbos. Okay, whereas the other rituals were more focused on the whole lulav experience. So the Gemara says, Hamar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua Be'arava. But doesn't Rav Nachman say that, no, it was done with the Arava alone, it wasn't a Rava ritual? Amar Leh, he said back, Hu Amar Lecha Be'arava Shkoyach. He said it was an Arava, Ve'anam Mina Belulav, but I don't agree, I think it was a Lulav, and that explains why we don't do it on Shabbos, because they would not do a marching ritual with the Arava. Itmar, it was taught, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Belulav. Rav Shmuel bar Nassan Amar Rabbi Chanina be'arava. So it was a debate. Was the marching ritual with a lulav or was it with an arava? V'chein Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua be'arava. Now, okay, so Amalei, so and just to end this, Amalei Rabba Rav Yitzchak Bray. Rabba said to Rav Yitzchak, Bray to Rabba Bar Barchana, the son of Rabba Bar Barchana, Bar Uriah, son of a lion. Tava Eimelecha Milsa Mal Yasa Davi Amri Avuch. Let me tell you a great thing your father used to say. Hadnan, that the Mishnah says, Kol Yom Akivinim Zibech Pamachas, also Yom Akivinim Zibech Sheva Piamim, that they did a 7-day marching ritual. Hachi Amar Avucha Mishmeid Rabbi Leo, Elazar Belulav. It was with a lulav, not the Arava. And that's why we don't do the Arava ritual today, because the Arava ritual was really about the altar. Okay, so we will pick up with here tomorrow, but the question we're left with is, Why nowadays do we not do the Arava ritual on Shabbat? And the current answer, the one answer the Gemara is contemplating, is either we manipulated the calendar so we don't have to deal with it, or number two, the ritual of the Arava that was done on Shabbat was by the altar. And the ritual we do of the marching was not the focus of the Arava ritual. And that's the reason we don't do it on Shabbat, because we don't have that ritual anymore. But we're going to wrap this discussion up. We still haven't finished it. We'll continue it tomorrow. Okay.
That must have been beautiful.
Yeah.